There's been a lot of talk about this 28-year-old rugby player, former rugby player, Heather Anderson, whose brain was donated after she had passed away, and they found that she had CTE. What's been the reaction to this from the South African rugby?
First of all, just from my side and my colleagues, obviously one of empathy to her, obviously family, friends, ex-players and the sport. No one likes to lose somebody so young. And then just with regards to the Heather Anderson case, just to correct you there, she never played rugby union. She played rugby league and AFL. She had a career for about 18 years, but spent 1 year as a professional player. And she also spent 9 years in the military. And, you know, she was diagnosed with the CTE, as one does after you've passed away. What that raised the awareness for us is that up until now, in the professional sporting world, CTE seems to be a problem that existed with male rugby players or male collision sport players, and this was our first women's sport. And as you know, the women's game is growing, and we are encouraging that growth. So we've got to be aware that this doesn't only affect men; it affects women as well. So that was our first thing. The other thing is that what hasn't changed though is that unfortunately CTE isn't a medical condition, it's a pathological condition. It's only diagnosed once you've passed on, and that was the case here. The consensus out there still is that there is no causal relationship between CTE and concussion, but there's been a lot of work done by certain research groups, especially in the States, and they've looked at a bias sample of collision sport players and their brains post passing away, and they have found an associated link, and it's that associated link that rugby said, well, let's not wait around to see if there's a causal link, let's do something now about limiting the amount of headbangs one gets in a game.
And I mean, the awareness around CTE has kind of created the opportunity for the rugby associations to talk about what they're doing. The first thing is actually trying to find out what the extent of a problem is. Have there been any former South African rugby players in the rugby community who've developed degeneration of brain function?
If you ask me, am I aware of anybody today? No, we're not. And we work very closely with the Players Association, my players, and the Retired Community Association, the Legends, and they're not aware of anybody. But saying that, if there is a rugby player out there who has retired and is struggling with signs and symptoms of the CTE, the way it presents, you know, depression is one of the big main ones, please reach out to us. We would like to know because we're willing to help.
So what is SA Rugby doing to try and encourage former players to come forward if they're showing this?
Okay, so right now, like I said, this is an appeal to those, you know, if there are players out there with problems, please reach out to us. We're more than willing to help. But SA Rugby, together with the Legends, also with experts like Professor John Patricius and World Rugby are going to be coming on board, is that we'll be putting a resource together that we'll be making available to these retired rugby players, that if they've got problems, if they are worried about their sort of mental health status now post the game, they'll be able to reach out to us and we'll be able to help them with that.
Clint, what is SA Rugby's attitude towards repetitive concussion?
Our attitude is that we want to do as much as we can to mitigate concussion in the sport. I think it's important to state that we'll never get to a point where there is zero risk in the sport. You know, it's a collision sport, it's a physical sport. The people that play the sport, I think, like it because of the physicality. So we're never going to get to a stage where there's zero risk. There's always going to be some risk, but we've got to do what we can to mitigate risk. Our research to date shows that at the professional level of the game in South Africa, the Currie Cup level, you're getting a concussion in 1 in every 3 games. When we look at the under-13 Craven Week, you're looking at a concussion in 1 in every 7 games. The under-16 Grand Como, 1 in every 5 games. And the Craven Week, 1 in every 6 games. So we understand our risk. We're not sitting around doing nothing about it. Education, our big focus is on education, and that we do via the Boxmart Rugby Safety Program. That program has been in place at SA Rugby since 2008, and every iteration of that program we focus on concussion, and we focus on concussion prevention, identification and management. And that program is regulated, so that means every coach and referee in the country if you're working in rugby, every 2 years you have to recertify. So you are brought up to date with what is happening in the concussion space. So at a practice, a coach can identify a player who might have taken a bang to the head and they're suffering with signs and symptoms of concussion, bring them off, send them to be assessed by a doctor and manage them appropriately. So the Boxing Rugby Safety Program is very important. We've also got the blue card system. The blue card system is used to, when a player takes a bang in a game and the referee sees it, whether he suspects or is confirmed of a concussion, the referee shows them a blue card. That is indication to everyone watching that that player has suffered a concussion and has to remove themselves from the game. They can't take part further in that game that day. And then what happens is that the referee or the coach then records that concussion on the blue card data app. And then from there, once that information is recorded, that player's parent or guardian gets sent all the relevant information, tells them all about concussion, what they have to do, who they must go and see, and more importantly, what is the minimum time they have to stand down from the game before they can return to play.
How does South African rugby rank in terms of its management of concussion compared to its counterparts in the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere?
So I think we are up there with them. I'd like to say it's acknowledged, it was acknowledged even by a bit of research that was done, that the Boxing Rugby Safety Program is a leader in its field. So we lead in the field in certain ways. With regards to management of concussion, we follow the guidelines that are put out by the consensus statement that comes out every 4 years. So we manage concussion as it's done around the world. What rugby in South Africa has done is that obviously we've partnered with Concussion SA and John, and we've built this concussion network of expert doctors. So, if you get a concussion, if you're at school and you suffer a concussion and you've got to go and see a doctor and you don't know who to see, hop onto Concussion SA's website. You'll see a list of doctors in your area, and that's the doctor you can go and see. They're well versed in concussion management, and they'll know how to assess you. They'll also know the rules that are in place. If you're 18 years and younger in South Africa and you're suspected of a concussion or suffered a concussion, you cannot return to play sooner than 19 days. You'll be sitting out for 19 days. And if you're 19 years and older in the amateur game, you'll be out of rugby for 12 days. Yes, you've got to go and see a doctor, you've got to follow a graduated return to play. And then you can go back to rugby if approved by the doctor. But yes, we follow the world standards. So I'm very comfortable that we're up there with the best.
Clint, there have been various lawsuits brought around the long-term neurological damage caused by repetitive concussion. Is South African rugby concerned?
Those lawsuits are ongoing at the moment, and we are obviously watching those with interest. We have to. We'd be foolish not to. But our focus right now, and where our energy and resources are into the welfare of the players. We've got to do everything we can to put systems, interventions and strategies in place to mitigate the risk of concussion. And then when you do happen to suffer concussion, is this that we put systems in place that you're well managed, so that when you do return to the sport, you've recovered from your concussion and you can do so safely.
You mentioned this about one in 3 Currie Cup games there's a concussion.
Yeah.
Right? A lot of people believe that's frequent. Do you think that what we have in place as South African rugby right now is adequate to protect these players?
SA Rugby is considering doing more, and what we're going to do is we're potentially looking at intervening at the amateur level of the game. As you may or may not be aware, World Rugby in May approved the rollout of a trial period where you could amend the tackle laws. And by amending the tackle laws, thereby potentially making the game safer for those that played. For the amateur level of the game, we're looking at potentially changing the tackle height laws. That needs approval, but when that comes along, and if approved, it could have a marked effect on improving the safety of the players that play this game.
That's quite significant, isn't it?
It will be a significant time in the game, but we don't think it would be too different to what already happens at the amateur level of the game. Where we're looking at to bring the tackle height to, nearly 60% of all tackles take place there anyway. So it won't be too big a change, but it will be a marked event.
You know, rugby fans are skittish when any changes are made to the tackle laws, especially because they like the intensity of the game. And they're going to be worried that that's going to go to the professional game as well.
Well, look, I can't talk for the professional game now, but I just want to assure rugby fans out there, we're not going to change the intensity of the game. You know, what we're saying is that this is the new legal tackle height, this is where we want you to tackle. But go out there and tackle as hard as you can. So the intensity of the game is not going to change, they don't need to worry.
There were changes made to the scrum laws, to some of the tackle laws a few years ago. What kind of impact did you see from those changes?
So those laws came about in 2012, 2013, and in terms of catastrophic injury that was on engagement, that was marked. We had significant changes in the injury risk. And I must admit, if we get that level of change with the tackle height law changes, we would have made a marked improvement on the safety of this game.
The other big question is, how many big hits can a player take to the head before he's suffering real damage? Is SA Rugby thinking about this question that seems to be popping up more in the minds of parents who have kids who are playing rugby?
So it is the million-dollar question, and we don't know, and right now there's a lot of research going on at the moment. But saying that is this, we're not just waiting for that research. You know, World Rugby has already introduced the head contact process, and that's aimed at getting people to lower their heads in the contact, so two heads don't share the same head space and bash heads. And also with the tackle trial laws coming out from now until for the next 2 years, not only are we lowering the tackle, but we force you to tackle at the softer areas of the body. So there will be a decrease in the number of head bangs, but also a decrease in the force of those contact points.
Clint, what's a rugby passport, and how is it affecting how we're dealing with monitoring concussions?
Okay, I think you're referring to the rugby load passport. So what that is it's not a regulated rule at the moment, but it's a guideline that World Rugby has put out, but most professional teams around the world have adopted it. And what that is that it's a measurement and a recording of every training session that the player does. You record the amount of time he's trained, you record the type of session he does. The player also records the rate of perceived exertion, so you get an idea of how intense that session was. But also there are guidelines around that load passport, and those guidelines govern the amount of actual physical contact that can take place during the week at a training session. So one of the things the lobby bodies around the world are looking for is to cut down the amount of contact at training. Well, World Rugby has already addressed that, so we're looking at that. Maybe more could be done, I don't know, but we're already addressing it.
You know, we're playing in the URC, which is basically exposing South African rugby to rugby all year round. Doesn't that mean more headbutts and greater risk?
The amateur game is still only played over the winter season in South Africa, so there's no risk there. But we have moved north with the professional game. But it's important to note that players don't play more rugby than they played when we played in the Southern Hemisphere. And the reason for that is that players with their union entered into negotiations with the various rugby bodies. And we have an agreement in place that a professional rugby player can only play a maximum of 32 games a year. Can't play more than that. And then he also has to have a period of at least 6 weeks rest from the game. So that's all in place. So I don't think we're necessarily playing any more rugby than we were.
There's been a greater awareness around concussions in rugby over the last few years, and it appears to be leading to more people hesitating to either let their kids play or let their family members play the game. And there seems to be a perception that rugby has more concussions, or it's becoming more dangerous.
I think the CTE lawsuits have driven that. Okay, that's number one. Number two, because it's on everybody's, sort of on the front of everybody's minds at the moment, it appears as though concussion is a new injury in the game. It isn't. Also, with our research and what we're doing, we are looking for concussion. So we're finally getting to the point where we now know the real rate of concussions sort of in the game and at certain levels of the game. So I don't actually think the game's got any more dangerous or is any rougher than it used to be. I think we just got a better understanding of it. But what I will say is that the game also has never been safer, and the reason why I say that is there is so much awareness around rugby safety at the moment. And in South Africa and around the world, there are rugby safety programs that are aimed at educating and improving the awareness of correct rugby safety training and tackling techniques, information around concussion that coaches, referees, parents, players get. So everyone's way more aware. And there is a committed focus by World Rugby and all the rugby unions around the world to make this game safer. So I do think even though there may be this concern, the game is in a good space. It's never had so much attention to making it safer. Concussion is not just a rugby problem. Concussions occur in all sport, they occur in life. So we've got to keep perspective on it. The next thing I'd like to say is this, that the concussion is not just my problem, it's not just SA Rugby's problem. Everybody who's invested in this game has a responsibility. So coaches, referees, players, parents, administrators, medical staff, we have all got to work together collectively, because we have all got a responsibility to make this game safer for our kids that play this game. And if we do that, I think we're then moving properly in the right direction.